The middle school auditorium still smelled like floor wax and old varnish. Folding chairs squeaked as parents shifted. A custodian's small radio in the hall leaked a soft 70s tune, just a few notes before someone turned it down. On the stage, the school board sat behind plastic nameplates and a single jar of pens. My son, Ethan, stood beside me. His sleeves pushed just below the elbows because the fabric bothered his skin when he was nervous. The pale, ropey scars on his forearms shone under the fluorescent lights. A murmur rippled. I felt Ethan's fingers brush mine. Cool, slightly trembling. I squeezed once. "Breathe, buddy," I whispered. Principal Keener cleared his throat. "We'll keep comments brief. Mrs. Sadie Harper?" I stepped to the mic. Paper crinkled in my hand. "My son was mocked for his scars in the cafeteria," I said, careful, steady. "It has to stop," someone snorted. Metal chair legs scraped. A boy in the third row, taller than most 7th graders, tipped back in his seat. I recognized him, Luke Donnelly. His father, tall, barrel-chested, with roofing crew shoulders, sat beside him with arms crossed. Ethan kept his eyes on the carpet. I heard the tiny scratch of his sneaker against a staple someone hadn't picked up. "It happened by the milk cooler," he said, voice low. "He called me," he swallowed. "Patch arms," that was one. The word was small, but it stung like lemon on a paper cut. A gray-haired woman in a knit cardigan leaned to me. "Honey, I'm sorry," she whispered. The cardigan smelled faintly of cedar chests and hand cream. "Comfort," Luke spoke without standing. "It was a joke," his voice carried. "He's so dramatic." "Enough," the principal said, but the room had already shifted. Eyes, whispers, the soft static that builds before rain. I took a breath and kept my tone level. My son's scars came from the house fire when he was 8. He didn't choose them. He survived them. Luke rolled his eyes and slumped deeper, knocking the chair of a thin boy behind him. The thin boy winced, said nothing. The father finally rose, heavy boots thumping on the gym floor. He addressed the board, not me. "Kids tease. We did too. Toughen up." The gentlest piano note from that tinny hall radio found us again, like a memory you couldn't fully place. Ethan's jaw clenched. He lifted his sleeves all the way, the glossy lines stark in the light. My mouth went dry. I remembered the fire alarm's shriek, the taste of smoke, the feel of his hot, slick skin under a soaked dish towel. My hands tingled with the ghost of that night. "Mrs. Harper," the principal said, "will review the complaint." He sounded like a form letter. I didn't step back. "Luke's words aren't the only problem," I said softly. "They were repeated. And in front of a crowd. That's not teasing. That's cruelty." Luke's father, Frank, I remembered now, lifted his chin. "My boy isn't cruel." He turned to Ethan and let a second insult fly, short and practiced. "Quit being weak." That was 2. Cap reached. My stomach flipped, equal parts anger and something old and steadier. Resolve. The cardigan woman gasped. A man in a ball cap muttered, "That's out of line." A low hush fell, the kind that knows something is about to give. I looked at Frank Donnelly, and then at Luke. "Words leave marks, too," I said. "Sometimes deeper than scars." I set my notes down. "Principal Keener, I'd like to speak with Mr. Donnelly, parent to parent." Frank's jaw worked. "After," he said like a dare. Ethan looked up at me. His eyes were wet but clear. "Mom, we'll be okay," I said, quiet as a promise. The board shuffled papers. The radio clicked fully off. The air felt still, like the auditorium itself held its breath, as I turned from the mic and walked toward the aisle where Frank and Luke waited. And in that held breath, I knew we were walking toward something I couldn't unring, and the next step would decide who we were to this town. The night of the fire lives in layers. First the odor, hot plastic and wet drywall. Then the sound, a small pop, like a jar unsealing, and suddenly the world turned to alarms and orange. I was at the sink. Ethan was in his room with a library book about trains. When the smoke curled along the ceiling like a gray ribbon, I yelled his name and ran blind through a house I knew by touch. The walls were hot. The carpet burned my knees. I found him under the bed, coughing. "Mom," he rasped. I lifted him, felt the slick heat of his arms through his pajamas. and willed my legs to be ladders. 1 step, 2, the front door, the blessed slap of November air. Neighbors brought blankets. Someone pressed a mug of diner coffee in my hand. The steam smelled like every truck stop between here and Ohio. An engine roared up. A firefighter with soot-cut eyes shouted orders I didn't register. He wrapped Ethan's arms with gauze dipped in something cool that smelled faintly metallic. "Stay with me, champ," he said. His gloved thumb made a squeak on the plastic face shield. Ethan's lashes clumped with tears and ash. At the hospital, I learned the vocabulary that would become our second language: graphs, contractures, pressure garments. There were nights he shook with nightmares, and I would hum the softest song I knew, my father's favorite from an old jukebox at Miller's Diner. Over months, he healed. The scars didn't vanish. They laid their pale maps along his skin, proof of heat and survival. Kids stared, some asked. We practiced answers in the car. "I got burned when I was little," he'd say. "I'm okay." Once, a girl said, "Does it hurt now?" And Ethan answered, "Only when people look at me like that." She blushed, then smiled. Children can learn. But middle school is a different ecosystem. Pack rules, laughter like pebbles thrown from the dark. The first week, Luke joked in the lunch line. The second week, 4 boys repeated it. The third week, a tray clipped Ethan's elbow, and milk sprayed his sleeve while a chorus snickered. He came home, sat at our kitchen table, and rubbed at his forearm like he could erase it. "Mom," he said, voice scraped, "am I always going to be the scar kid?" I took his palm, pressed it to my cheek. "You're going to be the kind kid," I said. "And the smart one. And the funny one. Scars are just a page. You're the whole book." We tried the usual steps: emails, meetings, the counselor's office with its lavender plug-in scent, and a poster that said "Everyone belongs." People nodded sympathetically. Nothing changed. I watched Ethan's shoulders slope as he walked into school, a boy making himself smaller. I knew that walk. Childhood taught me to shrink for peace. Adulthood taught me a different math. Silence doesn't balance anything, so I prepared. I wrote down dates and incidents. I asked the thin boy who'd flinched behind Luke, his name was James, to write anonymously what he'd seen. I spoke with the lunch aide, Mrs. Bennett, who kept a tiny pocket rosary in her apron and said, I told them to hush. They didn't. I gathered everything into a simple folder, and I looked at the shadow box on my dresser. Inside, under glass, a bronze star, a medic's patch, a photo of a field tent the color of old canvas. My first life. Army nurse course. 18 months in a place of heat and dust and sudden sirens. I had kept it quiet in this town. Not a secret, just not a banner. People build boxes for mothers. Sometimes I let them. But boxes never fit forever. I set the shadow box beside the folder. One held proof of who hurt. One held proof of who helped. In the auditorium now, the chairs squeaked again. The board called for a 5-minute recess. Frank Donnelly stood, hand briefly grazing the back of Luke's neck. Luke shrugged it off, eyes darting toward Ethan's arms, then away. The smell of coffee drifted from the hallway, thick, diner dark, a comfort you could hold. "Ma'am," the cardigan woman said gently. "Do you need water?" "No, thank you," I said. "We'll be fine." I looked at my son. He met my eyes and nodded once, a small soldier's nod. From somewhere deep, the calm rose. I had carried it through nights louder than this. I lifted the black folder in the shadow box. "Mr. Donnelly," I said, stepping into the aisle. "A word, before the meeting resumes." He looked at the frame in my hand. Something flickered across his gaze, curiosity, then caution, and I felt the room tilt toward us, as if the whole town leaned in to hear what would happen next. And I walked those last 3 steps, past the point of polite retreat. We stopped near the back doors where the exit signs glowed red. The cool draft there carried the scent of rain on pavement. Somewhere outside, a truck downshifted with a long sigh. Frank folded his arms. Luke hovered, heel grinding a scuff into the waxed floor, eyes restless. I kept my voice even. "I'm asking for one thing, that your son leave mine alone." Frank lifted a shoulder. "Boys sorted out. They tried," I said. "Your boy started it." Luke smirked. "Crybaby." I looked at him, then at Frank. That's the second time tonight he's chosen small over kind. Frank's jaw set. Watch your tone. I thought of the field tent, the steady clack of a generator, the itch of sand under a collar. I'd said harder truths to men 5 minutes from the worst day of their lives. My tone is steady, I said, because I know exactly what I'm asking and why. Parents sidled closer, pretending to check their phones. The cardigan woman, her name tag read Betty, stood a respectful distance away, hands clasped like a choir alto waiting for her cue. A veteran in a VFW cap came to a stop by the door, gaze flicking to my shadow box. Ethan stayed beside me, quiet. He slid his sleeve higher, just a fraction, as if to say, I'm done hiding. The overheads hummed. I could feel the slight roughness of the folder's cardstock under my fingertips. Grounding. Frank jerked his chin toward Ethan's arms. If he doesn't want attention, cover those, I breathed in. Coffee and wax and the faintest trace of gym dust. He doesn't have to cover who he is, I said. And he won't. A hiccup of silence, broken by the squeal of the stage mic as the principal tested it. Heads turned, then turned back to us, because our corner now had its own gravity. Luke took a half step forward, voice low enough that only we would hear. Should have stayed home. He looked at the scars and then, for the first time, at Ethan's eyes. He faltered. Just a flicker, Ethan spoke, voice steady. I survived a fire. You survived a joke you told yourself. A soft of approval from Betty. The veteran's mouth twitched like he'd found a penny under a seat. Frank pressed. You making a spectacle? He nodded at the frame. What's that for? I angled the shadow box so he could see only the edge. Something I've carried, I said. Like my son carries his. He frowned. You think a bunch of trinkets... Mr. Donnelly, I said. Words are doors. Choose carefully. He opened his mouth, closed it. Something like calculation flickered through his eyes. This was the moment men like Frank decided whether to double down or look down. Behind us, the board called the meeting back to order. We'll reconvene in 2 minutes, the principal announced. Parents drifted to their chairs, but the humid attention stayed with us. A boy in the second row, the thin one, James, cleared his throat. Sir? He said toward Frank, almost apologizing for speaking. He didn't do anything, I saw. They pushed his tray. Everyone heard. It landed like a coin in a silent room. Luke's shoulders hitched. Frank's nostrils flared. I opened the folder. Without stepping closer, I let him see the top page. Dates, times, a short note from the lunch aide. I'm not guessing, I said. I'm documenting. Frank's gaze hopped from the paper to Ethan's arms, then back to the shadow box. The color drained, just a shade, from his face. He looked at the glass, trying to make out what sat inside. Mrs. Harper, the veteran said softly from the doorway, not to interrupt, but to steady. You need anything? Thank you, I said. I've got it, Frank swallowed, sound small in that big room. The bravado thinned. He leaned in half an inch, as if the frame pulled him. Ethan's breath shivered once and quieted. He took my free hand. The skin of his palm was warm and a little dry, like paper left in the sun. 2 minutes. The principal called again, brighter, like a weatherman outrunning a storm. Frank pointed at the frame. What is it? I met his eyes. Something you may recognize, I said. The words careful, each one placed. If you've been where I've been. The veteran in the cap took off the cap and held it against his chest, like he already knew. And in the beat before I turned the glass, Frank's face began to change. I lifted the shadow box so the auditorium light struck the glass. Inside, neatly fixed to navy felt, a bronze star, a combat medical badge, and a sun-faded photo of a tent hospital with its zippered mouth half open. My nameplate sat at the bottom, the letters a little crooked because my son had glued it when he was 7, proud hands smudging the brass. Frank stared. The room leaned in again. The veteran at the door exhaled softly, a sound full of knowing. I spoke quietly. I was an army nurse. I earned this overseas. I've seen boys bleed and still find the strength to stand. I've seen men carry scars you never see. I tilted the frame so the felt caught the light. And I've seen courage look like this. I nodded at Ethan's forearms. Not hidden, not apologized for. Frank's mouth opened. His gaze dropped to his own hands, calloused, nicked. He turned one palm up. I watched a tremor move through his fingers, then up his forearm, as if a memory had just walked back in through a door he'd nailed shut. He whispered, not to me at first, but to something behind me. I know those scars. It was barely a breath. But Luke heard. So did Betty. So did the veteran, who lowered his cap and stood taller. Frank swallowed. Not his, mine. His eyes flicked to me. Summer of '96. Roofing job gone wrong. Nail gun misfire, fire on the tar kettle. Forearms caught it. He rubbed the tendon above his wrist, tracing a line that no longer showed. I wore long sleeves 3 years. Laughed louder than anyone so nobody saw. A flush crawled up his neck, then drained away. He looked at Luke. The boy's face, usually set to board, had a crack down the middle. He stared at his father, then at Ethan's arms, then at the frame. Dad? Luke said, voice small for the first time all night. Frank's breath hitched. He faced the room, finally faced it. I taught my boy wrong, he said husky. Taught him to bite first so nobody sees you bleed. He shook his head. That's on me. The veteran near the door nodded once, a benediction. Takes a spine to say that out loud. I didn't soften. Dignity isn't sugar. It's oak. You can start teaching something better, I said. I held up the folder, with consequences. I stepped to the mic again, frame under my arm, folder in my hand. The room's sound came back in layers, a baby fussing softly, a chair click, the hum of lights. My son was targeted repeatedly, I said. I request a formal disciplinary action per policy, restorative steps, and training for cafeteria duty. I'm also establishing a fund. I lifted a second item from my tote, a simple navy envelope with the town seal, for a peer leadership program run by veterans and nurses. The first check is inside. Principal Keener blinked. You, what? Middle school needs models who've walked through fire and kept walking, I said. We have them in this town. Frank cleared his throat, voice rough. My company will cover the new training tables for the cafeteria, he said, surprising everyone, maybe including himself. And Luke, he turned. You're apologizing, publicly, now. Luke looked at Ethan, then at the floor, then up again. The boy was 14, full of mirror and armor, but armor can be set down. I'm sorry, he said. The words were stiff at first, then real. I was wrong. Ethan's chin lifted a fraction. Thanks, he said. No extra ribbon, just enough. The principal found his gavel and rapped it once, as if a parade needed cueing. Parents shifted. Betty dabbed her eye with a tissue pulled from a sleeve. Grandmother magic. I set the shadow box on the edge of the stage where everyone could see it. The medals caught the light like patient stars. I spoke one more line into the mic, words owed to the boy standing beside me. My son is not his scars, I said. He is his courage. The room changed temperature then, not warmer, not colder, just clearer. You could see the people you lived among, who they were, and who they could be when the right door opened. And for the first time all night, Frank Donnelly stood still and quiet, pale as if a long fever had finally broken. And in the hush that followed, I heard the soft click of something better beginning. After the meeting, we lingered in the hallway where trophy cases glowed with old victories. Track medals from '79, a chess photo with haircuts that could start a conversation all by themselves. The custodian turned the music back on low. Rainy Night in Georgia, thin and sweet from a battered speaker. Ethan traced the case glass with one fingertip, leaving a tiny fog halo where his breath met the air. Frank approached, hat in hand he hadn't been wearing before, which told me he'd gone to find it. The brim was sweat-stained, broken in. He stopped at arm's length. Mrs. Harper, he said. Sadie. He glanced at Ethan. Son. Ethan nodded, chin high. Sir, Frank swallowed. I was that kid, he said quietly. Only I hit it. I'm sorry I taught mine to swing instead of stand. I didn't hand him absolution. That isn't how it works. Make it real tomorrow, I said. And the day after, he nodded. Understood. He turned to his boy. We rebuild what we wreck. Luke shifted, hair falling into his eyes. I'll sit with you at lunch, he told Ethan, awkward, sincere. If you want, Ethan lifted a shoulder. We'll see. Kind, not naive. The veteran joined us, extending a hand. Name's Walter, he said. VFW post down on River Street. If you need speakers for that program, we'll bring the stories. The right kind. I'd be honored, I said. In my mind, I saw the hall. Wood paneling, coffee in thick mugs, flags that had watched boys become men and then elders. I heard the jukebox in the corner offer up the first bar of something from '72. Nostalgia can be a bridge when you don't turn it into a fence. Betty pressed a small card into my palm. Her number. Looped script. Call if you need a ride to the board office, she said. Or a casserole that doesn't taste like a committee made it. We all smiled. Small, grateful. The tension in my chest loosened like a stubborn jar finally opening. Principal Keener approached, looking a touch less like a form letter. Mrs. Harper, he said, will formalize the disciplinary action and review the cafeteria supervision. And thank you for the initiative. He glanced at the shadow box I carried. And for your service, I nodded once. See that the service continues where it counts. Outside, the air smelled like rain on asphalt and grass. Ethan and I walked to the car. He slid into the passenger seat and watched drops chase themselves down the window. Mom? He said, Do you miss it? The field tent, I smiled. Sometimes I miss the clear part, knowing exactly what to do. I reached over and brushed a curl off his forehead. But I like this better. We build, not just patch. He breathed out, a long, even line. I didn't like standing there, but I liked standing. That's how it starts, I said. The dashboard clock clicked over to the next minute, neat as a metronome. As we pulled out, a pickup idled in the lane. Frank in the driver's seat lifted 2 fingers at the brim of his hat. Old-fashioned respect learned somewhere better than tonight. I returned it. No victory lap. No crowing. Just the clean space that comes when things are put in their right places. Ethan turned the radio and found an oldies station. A familiar guitar line bled in through a touch of static. We didn't sing, we just listened. At the next light, Ethan rolled his sleeves back down, not to hide, but because the evening air had a chill. Mom? He said again. What's the moral? I thought of the shadow box, the envelope, the boy who apologized. That scars can be mirrors, I said, and respect outlives shame. He nodded, satisfied. The light turned green. We drove on, quiet and steady, like people who had walked through heat and come out carrying only what mattered. Morale. Honor is the only inheritance worth keeping.